We usually operate under this kind of unwritten social contract when it comes to a Q&A.
Right.
Like, there's this underlying assumption of a transaction of truth. You ask a question because you like information, and, well, the other person provides that information. It's clean. It's linear, like asking a stranger for directions or, asking a barista what's in a seasonal drink.
Yeah, it's a simple, straightforward exchange of data. There's no subtext.
But then you step into the realm of deep personal or spiritual conversations, and suddenly that clean exchange just completely disintegrates. You are no longer navigating a simple transaction of data. You're looking at a communicative landscape that is loaded with hidden motives and defense
Oh,
mechanisms.
totally. And ego protection. It becomes the absolute definition of conversational muddy waters. I mean, the question being asked is rarely the actual question that needs answering.
Exactly. And navigating those muddy waters is exactly what we are doing today. So welcome to this special deep dive, custom crafted specifically for you as you prep for your Thursday Night Life group meeting on April 30th, 2026.
It's going to be a really practical one.
It really is. And this is entirely based on the insights from your life group leaders, Jim and Vivian Turner, using the incredible notes Jim took during Pastor Hady's 9 a.m. sermon on April 26th at Compass Bible Church in New Braunfels, Texas.
Our core mission today is to unpack Pastor Hayden's insights from Matthew chapter 21. Specifically, this incredibly liberating idea that, well, not every question actually needs to be answered.
Which is a huge paradigm shift. Pastor Hayden really drew out some essential tools for identifying what he calls smoke screens in our everyday conversations.
Yeah, those are so common.
But before we get into the psychology of all that, Jim and Vivian did want us to make sure your calendar is locked in for a few things, because community is just as important as the study.
Definitely.
And I have to say, the first item here might be the most crucial.
Yeah.
Saturday, May 9th at 9 a.m. is the men's breakfast. The menu alone requires your attendance. I'm talking brisket tacos, eggs, bacon, and potatoes.
Man, if brisket tacos doesn't get you out of bed on a Saturday morning, I'm not really sure what will. Plus, Pastor Evan is bringing the teaching, so it's going to be a phenomenal time of fellowship.
Completely agree. Also, keep Wednesday, May 27th on your radar for the summer midweek church-wide fellowship. Just a logistical heads up on that one. It officially takes the place of your regular Thursday night meeting that week. So, adjust your schedule accordingly.
Good to know.
And finally, Thursday, June 18th is going to be a dinner and fellowship night hosted right at Jim and Vivian's house. You'll get more details in the coming days, but definitely save the date.
Getting those dates locked in is important, I think, because it sets the stage for the kind of relational depth Pastor Hayden was talking about. Like, if we're going to apply what we learned from Matthew 21, verses 23 through 27, we're going to be doing it in the context of those exact relationships.
Right, over dinner, over coffee.
Exactly, in life group. But to really grasp how to navigate tricky, insincere conversations, we have to look at the masterclass Jesus puts on in the temple courtyard. And that requires understanding the absolute powder keg of a situation he was walking into.
Yeah, imagine you're standing at a podium in a public square. Suddenly, political operatives from rival factions, people who historically despise each other, they walk up shoulder to shoulder just to confront you.
Which is wild.
It is, because from what Pastor Hayden highlighted, that is essentially what is happening here with the Sanhedrin, right?
That is the exact mechanism of this confrontation.
Yeah.
Jesus is approached and asked two very pointed questions. First, what authority do you have? And second, by whose authority do you do these things?
Okay.
Now, the group asking this isn't just a handful of curious theologians. This is the Sanhedrin, the highest ruling council in Jewish life. And they were famously divided. You had the chief priests and the elders, who were aristocratic, wealthy, and heavily aligned with the Sadducees.
And the Sadducees were the pragmatists, right? Very focused on temple operations, very cozy with Rome, and they didn't even believe in the resurrection of the dead.
Exactly. They were the theological and political establishment. But then you also had the scribes, who leaned heavily toward the Pharisees. And the Pharisees were the populists. They were strictly devoted to the law, deeply resentful of Rome, and they absolutely believed in the supernatural and the resurrection.
So they were polar opposites.
Historically, yes, the Sadducees and Pharisees agreed on almost nothing.
So their presence together is the mechanism that proves this isn't a theological debate. Like, if I'm Jesus and I see these two bitter rivals teaming up to question my authority, that sudden alliance is a blaring siren.
Oh, for sure.
It signals a coordinated attack to trap me, not some genuine search for spiritual truth.
It's basically an assassination attempt on his character, wrapped up in a polite question. And there's a really fascinating nuance here that Jim caught from the commentary notes. Matthew's account of this moment only mentions the chief priests and the elders confronting Jesus. He leaves out the scribes entirely.
Oh, interesting.
But Mark's parallel account in chapter 11 explicitly includes the scribes.
Which, on the surface, looks like a contradiction. But if we view this like a modern-day press scrum, it makes perfect sense. The terminology varies depending on which gospel writer is describing the event, and crucially, who was physically shoved up to the front of the crowd in Jesus' face at that exact second.
Right. Matthew's describing members acting on behalf of the entire Sanhedrin, even if he doesn't list the complete formalized roster.
It adds such a vivid, chaotic reality to the scene. And establishing that hostility is what sets up Pastor Hayden's first major principle. We must actively probe for genuineness.
Yes.
Because the foundational rule for surviving these muddy waters is realizing that we cannot safely assume people's questions are sincere.
Which feels incredibly counterintuitive for a Christian, doesn't it? We are conditioned to be helpful. We are taught to be ready to give an answer. So if someone asks a question about faith, the instinct is to immediately serve up the answer on a silver platter.
The instinct is good, but the execution can be kind of naive. Pastor Hayden grounds this in biblical wisdom, pointing to Proverbs 14.15, which essentially warns the simple to not just blindly believe everything they hear.
Right.
And then he brings in Matthew 10.16, the famous mandate to be innocent as doves, but wise as serpents. We are called to answer the person, not just the question.
I want to translate that phrase, answer the person, into a practical reality. It reminds me of doing IT troubleshooting.
Okay, I like where this is going.
If a coworker comes to my desk in a panic and says, my laptop is completely fried, throw it in the trash. I don't just say, you got it, and toss it out.
No, you'd get fired.
Exactly. I probe. I ask, is the screen totally black? Did you spill coffee on the keyboard? Is it just that the Wi-Fi disconnected? The initial surface complaint almost never reflects the actual root issue.
Oh. That analogy hits the nail on the head because it highlights the necessity of the diagnostic process. The surface question is often a symptom, not the disease.
Right.
When someone asks a highly combative question about faith, they're rarely just seeking data. They're operating out of their underlying psychological barriers. Pride, fear, a desire for autonomy, or maybe a past hurt.
Yeah, dealing with the heart really just means bypassing their surface-level intellect to address whatever emotional or psychological wall is actually keeping them from God.
But let me pose a hurdle here, because I guarantee someone in the life group is going to wrestle with this on Thursday. If we are constantly analyzing people's motives, if we are playing armchair psychologist with every question we receive, don't we cross the line into cynicism?
That's a fair point.
Like, how do we balance probing for genuineness with being innocent as doves without just assuming everyone is a bad faith actor?
Well, that tension is exactly why probing requires so much wisdom. Cynicism assumes the absolute worst and disengages. It says, you're a liar, I'm not talking to you. Probing, on the other hand, assumes there is a deeper, more vulnerable issue at play, and it actively engages to find it. When you probe by asking clarifying questions, you are actually honoring the person.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
Yeah, you are saying, I care enough about you to get to your real struggle, rather than just playing a superficial game of intellectual ping pong. It's an act of profound patience.
So it's a protective measure that is rooted in love, not suspicion. And if we establish that these religious leaders are setting a trap, Jesus can't just hand them a straightforward answer. He has to flip the dynamic.
And that takes us right into Pastor Hayden's second principle, exposing intent. Jesus does this brilliantly by bringing up John the Baptist.
He completely turns the tables, they demand his credentials, and instead of defending himself, he asks them about the baptism of John. Where did it come from, heaven or man?
Wait, on the surface, bringing up John the Baptist seems like a total non sequitur.
Right.
How does questioning them about a dead prophet help Jesus prove his own authority in this exact moment?
Because John the Baptist wasn't just any prophet, he was the forerunner. His entire divinely appointed mission, his whole message, was to say, I have come to prepare a way for the Lord. The one coming after me is the Messiah.
Oh, I see.
So to validate John's ministry is, by logical necessity, to validate Jesus's ministry.
It's a brilliant logical trap.
Mm-hmm.
He forces them to take a public stance on a highly controversial figure, knowing that whatever answer they choose will expose their true motives.
And their reaction proves his point perfectly. They huddle up to strategize, not to search for the truth. They realize if they say John's authority was from heaven, Jesus will rightfully ask, well, then why didn't you believe him when he pointed to me?
Yeah, checkmate.
But if they say his authority was merely human, they risk inciting a riot because the massive crowds firmly believe John was a genuine prophet.
So they go with the classic political dodge. We don't know.
Which is such a hollow answer. As Pastor Hayden points out, we don't know in this specific context actually translates to I refuse to deal with it.
Wow. Yeah.
They wouldn't admit Jesus had authority because they absolutely refused to submit to it, but they were too cowardly to face the social fallout of denying John. By rejecting the question, their absolute lack of sincerity is dragged right out into the daylight.
They threw up a smoke screen, and Jesus blew right through it.
Yeah.
And Pastor Hayden brought this concept of the smoke screen right into our modern context, which is where the psychology of all this gets really fascinating.
Definitely.
A common example he uses when you're trying to share the gospel, you're talking about Jesus, and suddenly the person interrupts and says, well, what about all the evil and suffering in the world?
Which is, objectively, one of the most profound and difficult philosophical questions in human history.
It is. But in the context of a personal conversation about salvation, it is almost always deployed as an evolutionary defense mechanism to protect the ego. Abstract arguments, like the grand problem of evil or the age of the earth or the reliability of ancient manuscripts, they're safe.
Right.
They're emotionally detached. You can debate philosophy all day without ever having to actually change your life.
That is the core of a smokescreen. It's like a magician's misdirection. The person wants to keep you arguing about a shiny, abstract object so they don't have to confront the terrifying reality of personal accountability to a holy God.
Yes.
Submitting to God requires surrendering autonomy, and the human ego will throw up any intellectual roadblock it can find to avoid doing that.
So how do we expose that intent today without sounding incredibly arrogant? If drawing out the deep waters of the heart takes patience, what is the right tool to cut through the misdirection?
Well, Pastor Hayden provided a phenomenal cutting question for these exact moments. When someone throws up an intellectual smokescreen, you pause the debate and ask this.
Okay, what is it?
If I answered your question to its fullest, if I gave you an explanation that completely satisfied your intellect, would you then be willing to follow Jesus?
Wow, that completely shifts the gravity of the room. You are stripping away the abstraction and forcing them to look at their own underlying motives.
Because if their honest answer is no, if they admit that even a perfect answer wouldn't change their mind, then the problem of evil wasn't the real obstacle. Their will was the obstacle.
Yeah, they just didn't want to submit.
Exactly. And exposing that intent calmly and clearly is what it means to be wise as a serpent.
You're holding up a mirror to their heart. But what happens when they look in that mirror? Their insincerity is exposed, and they still refuse to engage honestly.
That's the tough part.
This brings us to Pastor Hayden's final principle, and honestly, this is where the friction is going to be highest for the life group. Verse 27. Jesus refuses to answer insincere questions. He just stops.
Once the religious leaders deliver their cowardly "we don't know," Jesus doesn't debate them anymore. He says, "Neither will I tell you by what authority I do these things." He just shuts the inquiry down.
Right.
Pastor Hayden tied this directly to Jesus' own teaching in Matthew 7:6 about not casting your pearls before swine.
We really need to unpack the psychology of why this feels so difficult for Christians. There is this pervasive savior complex within modern Christianity. We feel this immense, crushing burden to be the ultimate persuaders.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
We think if we just find the perfect analogy or the airtight apologetics argument, we can argue someone into the kingdom of heaven.
And that complex places an unbiblical amount of pressure on the believer. It ignores the limits of human persuasion. I mean, you cannot out-argue a stubborn will.
Exactly.
When someone is utilizing a smokescreen, they have no real desire to yield to the truth. Continuing to throw theological pearls at them doesn't help them. It actually validates their deflection.
It gives them the dangerous illusion that their intellectual dodge is a legitimate, insurmountable reason to reject God.
So walking away isn't a failure of the Great Commission. It's actually a necessary boundary. It feels like realizing you're playing a rigged carnival game.
Oh, I hate those games.
Right. You know the ones where the rings are just slightly too small to actually fit over the bottles? You can stand there for hours, getting angrier and angrier, throwing your money at the vendor, convinced that if you just fix your throwing angle, you'll win.
Yep.
But the game is fundamentally designed for you to lose. The only actual winning move is to recognize the trap, set the rings down, and walk away.
That perfectly encapsulates the emotional boundary Pastor Hayden was stressing. If you stay at that rigged game, you are going to fall into sin. You're going to get frustrated, you're going to become bitter, and you're going to lose your peace. all while trying to dialogue with someone who is actively mocking the truth.
It's exhausting.
It really is. Jesus modeled perfect authority by refusing to let insincere people dictate the terms of his engagement. He reserved his energy, his teaching, and his answers for those who were genuinely seeking.
Refusing to answer isn't quitting, it's protecting your own soul, and it provides a sobering reality check for the person trying to play games with God.
It is an incredibly freeing framework. It completely removes the burden of having to win every single argument and places the focus back where it belongs, on discerning the condition of the heart.
As we bring all these threads together for your meeting this Thursday, let's just synthesize these insights. First, we have to discard the naive assumption that every question is a genuine search for truth. We must be wise as serpents.
Right.
Second, we need to deploy clarifying questions to expose those psychological smokescreens, getting past the safe, abstract debates to uncover the real barriers of the will.
So crucial.
And finally, we have to give ourselves permission, following Jesus' direct example, to establish boundaries and refuse to answer when the questioner is proven to be insincere.
It equips you to have conversations that actually matter, rather than exhausting yourself in debates that were never designed to go anywhere.
So, as you head into Jim and Vivian's living room this Thursday night, we want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. Think back to our opening idea, that communicative landscape filled with muddy waters.
Yeah, we've all been there.
I want you to mentally revisit a recent conversation you had about faith, where you walked away feeling totally drained, trapped, or frustrated. Looking back with these new tools, were you exhausting yourself, trying to clear a smokescreen while ignoring the actual state of a person's heart? And going forward, how will you find the courage to stop the intellectual ping pong, look the person in the eye, and ask, if I fully answer this, what will you actually do with the truth?
That's a powerful question.
It really is. Have a fantastic life group meeting this Thursday. Definitely enjoy those brisket tacos at the men's breakfast, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.